Good morning. All right. Just getting everything set up here, just about ready to go. It was a busy weekend for me, so I did not get a chance to do any project work, unfortunately. But I did get a lot done. It just wasn't tied to this. But I've slept a few times since the last session on Friday, so let's do a quick review of what we finished up and then what we're going to work on today. So let me make sure my microphone's working. Looks like it is. I've had that happen before where I was talking into a muted microphone. Okay, so the last time I was coding, which was Friday, we kind of finished up a few little loose ends on the combat scene. So we got it to a point where I feel comfortable moving on to a new, something new to work on. We've got at least the base stuff working in combat now. It's not balanced or polished by any means at all, but we've got the raw workflow and stuff and all the objects that are necessary to make it work built out now. So, and we have a very basic UI here that we can look at. So, on this we're in the combat scene right now. That's what's loaded in Unity here. So what we can do is we can just go ahead and play this practice scene we have set up. I don't remember if I still have to update the database or not. I thought we fixed that as well in the last session. So we're going to find out here. But once you're loaded in, it'll load the characters and the enemies in the state they were in when you exited the game. So it looks like I exited in the middle of a combat here because one of the enemies still have some HP. Or actually, it looks like all of the heroes are dead here. And the last playthrough I think I did, I was testing a scenario to see what would happen if all the players died to make sure the end game scene would show that the player had lost. Yeah, so it pops up here, player has lost, and then we created this new little button you can click to generate a new combat. You can see here it refreshes the HP and the action timers for all the players and enemies. I remember us having issues with the sprite generators in AI. I was just trying to generate some basic sprites to use. But I'm not worried about too much about that. These are all just placeholders for now. we can worry about really making it look good in the graphics a little bit later anyways, when we at least start fleshing out the game and getting a game workflow going where it's actually working. But you can see here I really beefed up the enemies in our test scene to kind of test what happened when the player died last. So the players are getting smoked right now by the enemies. And then when it's done, so you can see the animations and stuff are all working as well on the sprite generators, as well as this asset that we have pulled in called I think it's the Fantasy Heroes asset from the Hippo company. So we have a nice little setup here. We have a couple of bugs, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward today with items and item generation, see if we can make some progress on that next concept. And then we can let's look at the task list. So we have this task list here that we're working through. So on Friday, we went ahead and marked these off because I consider them in a point where they're at least kind of that rough first pass is completed, and this whole part is at least doing the basic workflow and working. So today we're going to start with the item generation, which is going to involve a couple different tables, as I mentioned before. We're going to create a base item table, and that will be all the items that our game can pick from to generate items from. So it'll be like the base stats for an item, and then we're going to have a generated item table that will actually store items that have been generated in a game. So, for example, when a player enters a dungeon and they complete a combat, there might be a random item that's tied to the loot for that. And what will happen is the game is going to first find a base item that matches the loot table. So let's say the loot table says there could be a wooden sword as something that would drop for loot. So it picks wooden sword, and then it loops through the generation logic itself. So based on what type of item it is, what rarity it is. So think of games like MMOs and stuff like that where they have common items, uncommon, magic, epic. Based on what type of item it is, it might roll for some additional stats and upgrades to that item. So let's say you have a magic longsword, it might roll 2 additional stats that could beef up maybe strength and damage on that item or something. So that's what we're going to work on today, is both of those pieces. The 2 separate tables that are going to store the items, the services and the proto files required to access that data and send it back and forth to the UI, and then some logic that's going to generate these additional stats and also save them appropriately. So there might be, we'll have to decide how this all works, how it makes sense to work in the database, because there can be one too many generated stats per generated item. And to do that in a database, we're probably going to have an additional table just for those generated stats. And then those will probably link back to a generated item ID in that generated table. So it'll actually end up being 3 tables, I think, as I think through this. And maybe even more than that. Because not only are we going to have like the base items that it can pull from, but we also need a list of whatever type of generated stats could be accessed. So there might be several tables here as I think through it. But let's go ahead and get started, and as we go through it, we'll slowly start figuring out how we want this to look. So we're going to be working mostly in this server, at least initially here. Let's start with the proto item, since that's kind of like the main object item that we work with between Unity and Java. So let's create a new one, and let's call this, or we actually already have a item proto, so let's look at that to start. and see what we had put down here. This was just when we did our first pass in the game design phase. We wanted to kind of build out some base items to get started with and kind of think through the processes. So you can see we already kind of thought of this item modifier object type. So this will, in the database, this will probably end up being an additional table to store the modifiers that are on an item. So something similar to what's here will be in that table. And what else? These are just basic stats. So weapon items, we'll probably stick with this very basic item types for now, and then we'll eventually flesh this out better. So for now, we're going to create a weapon and an armor type, I think, just to get the system working. And then we're probably going to come back and add additional slots. So we're going to have like boots, pants, gloves, stuff like that. We're going to have additional spots to put items. But let's just get this working with a couple different item types and make sure it works first. And then it should be easy to come back in and add those additional types. And this kind of, it gives us the way to modify combat and test that as well. So the weapons are going to allow us to modify the damage going in and out in combat. And armor, of course, will modify how much defense can block the damage that's being done. So I think this is a good start. So let's build the name, value, level, item type, item level. And then they have, each item has all of these stats no matter what. So this is like the common. Think back to the units we were working on where we have units, but we had enemy units and hero units. So they had a whole lot of common unit fields that were all tied to anything. And then they had specific stats tied to either enemies or heroes. And that's kind of the same setup here. We're even using the same keyword. We're using the one of. You can only be one of these types of items. It's either a weapon or armor, not both. And then we have the list of item modifiers that'll get attached here. So I think we'll create this base item object in the database first. So what it's going to have is an item ID. Let's go in there. Let's just start working on that. Let's make this a little smaller so maybe I can see them both at the same time. And let's create a new table. Let's call this one base item. That way we know it's not the items that are actually in a game. It's the items that can be pulled into a game. It's the base items that it kind of has a catalog of items that it can pick from. And I think right now, the way I'm doing this, I have a level tied to an item, and that'll kind of help us determine what items would drop in what areas. So if you're in a low-level area, only low-level items should be dropping, and similarly, if you go to a higher-level dungeon, then higher-level items have a chance to drop. Other than that, at least for now, we won't even go into more logic than that. So let's call this ID. We always need an ID field to start. We'll turn on auto increment for that one. And then we need an item name. I always like to prefix name with item or whatever it is, mainly because name is usually a reserved word in some programming languages. I don't like to overlap those. And then we need item value. On this one, we can just type value. Well, actually, let's use item value because value could also be a reserved word. And this one needs to be a number or an integer. Level should be a number as well. Let me think. What else do we need here? I don't know if we need anything else in this base table. We probably need item type to link it. It needs to just be armor or weapon. Needs to be what it ends up having in this field. And that would link it to the proper stats, maybe. Weapon stats, armor stats. And do we pull those two things out into their own separate? Does that part of the item need to be a separate table, or can it be inclusive of this table? That's the question I'm thinking through here. So let's put item type. There's only, right now anyways, there's only 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields. I could probably store those 7 fields in the base item table. And then some of them just won't be. If it's a piece of armor, then those 3 stats come into play. If it's a weapon, then the 4 stats for weapon come into play. Otherwise, I think that's probably good. So I'm just going to go ahead and include these base stats in the base table. I don't think they need to be broke out, at least not yet. Right now for attack speed, I think we're storing like a number. It's not a decimal. And then we're dividing it by 1,000. So it's stored in milliseconds. So that should be fine as an integer. Damage type will be, at least in the database, will be a string, a varchar. In the systems, it should be an enum eventually, once I have that all set up correctly. All right. Let's see. Is there any other data points that I feel like might be necessary to make this work? We have an item ID, and we're going to have to link to that item ID in the generated item table. So this is the base item table. This is the catalog of items that the game can pull from to generate an item. The generated item table will have the actual generated info, which will end up just being a base. So it'll have a generated item ID, but it'll have a link to the base item ID. So these are like static values here for each item ID. And then it will have what else will be in that table? I think this is good for this one, at least for now. Let's go ahead and apply and create this table. Now let's make our generated item table. This will have I'm going to name this one ID. Let's make that auto incrementing. Then we need to pull in the link to the other table, so call it base item ID. We can even, let's make this more specific, generated item ID. Since we have two ID fields in here, let's call them out specifically. This isn't also an integer. It's actually a long, but you use the same value in MySQL for that. All right, so we have a link to that. Now, what else do I store in here? Do I store like a modified value and it's an aggregate of all the modifiers that get added to here, or do I do that in the logic itself, maybe? I mean, I could very easily just use a formula in the server logic that calculates the base item stats plus the modifiers and returns it. And it doesn't have to be stored in the database. But do I want to store it in the database, I guess is my question. Does it make anything easier to just store it that way? I don't think it would use too much performance or space to store the items with all of their stats. I think I'm going to go that route for now, and if we run into performance issues or it's using more storage than I really wanted, maybe I'll refactor that. But here's what I think I want to do here. So I want to add I don't know. I don't know how I want to do this. In the UI, if you click on an item, I want it to show at the top of the description for the item, I want it to show the base stats. So that comes out of the base item table. And then below that, but do I want to, I guess what I'm saying is, do I want that description at the top where it shows the base stats, do I want that to already show the modified values? Maybe I do. But do I want to show it in a way where you can see the base stats plus the modified values and they're like two separate inputs? So like, for example, it might show the damage is 5 to 10, but let's say I also have a modifier of +2 damage, then would it show 5 to 10 and then in parentheses it might show +2? Or should it show 7 to 12 as the damage and that would just be the total amount? If you look at a game like, let me open a browser window here and we can look just a little bit. So I mean, the most popular game in this, with this idea, of course, is Diablo. So let's look at how Diablo 4 does. Item UI, I don't even know. I just want to see some images to kind of see how they do it. Make sure I want to kind of follow that same idea probably. So if we look here, it shows what rarity it is with the coloring and at the top there. Coloring, I would definitely want to do something similar there. It has an icon for the item. That's the same icon that's used in the inventory, and I want to do something similar there. I don't know what this picture is that I'm looking at. Oh, this is somebody showing how they would interpret it. So maybe I should look at one that is the way it is now. I mean, I don't have to match it exactly anyways, but in all honesty, it's hard to tell if in this UI, if this is the way that it is in the game, it's hard to tell if this number, this 358, is before or after the modifiers have been applied. At least the way their UI is written. If I'm a new user to their game, I wouldn't know. I mean, I actually don't know right now. Is that data already included in this number? What's this picture of? It's just how someone. I kind of like this idea. It's probably hard to see. I wonder if I can make this picture any bigger. That this person had generated. Yeah, this is good. I kind of like this idea over here where it shows the base stats and then it shows in a different color the modification to those base stats. And I still want to see, I think I still want to see these values down here as well to show the separate modifiers that are creating that. Or maybe even make this, maybe make the item card show just the base stats, and then if you want to, there'll be like a little button down here says modifiers, and then it'll show all of them broken out. If you want to say each modifier that's creating this modified item stat, that might be kind of neat. But I do, I mean, I like seeing the modifiers. Like if you pick up an epic item and see that there's 5 or 6 modifiers, you just get that little dopamine hit or whatever they call it when you see all that stuff. I don't want to lose that effect either. So maybe I won't turn that off. Maybe I'll do it very similar to this middle picture here, where it shows the stats for the item. So for armor, it'll show armor, resist, and block. And for weapons, it'll show low damage, high damage, and attack speed, and damage type, I think, are the 4 for items, or for weapons, I mean. And it'll show those, the base stats, and then it'll show like the plus whatever if there's modifiers that make them stronger. We're not even going to look into adding skills to item yet. That will be down the road, probably a very good way, good distance. For now, it's definitely just going to be upgrades to the base item stats on these modifiers. So yeah, if we think of it that way, then really what we're saying is we want these to be separate. We want to see the base item stats and the modifier stats side by side. And then in the game logic, it can calculate the modified values, and we can display the modified values in the UI, but there won't actually be any database entries for the modified values. So I think that's the better way to do this. So what that means is this is really just a bridge table. is what I would call this. So mainly we are linking the base item to a generated item. So this might be all the columns we need in this table. And why I'm calling it a bridge table is it's going to be the base item. All those stats from the base item are going to come into play. And then any stats in the generated modifiers table will be pulled in through a link here. So it'll be a link of modifiers, which is how our object's set up over here. You can see we have this item modifier, and it's tied to a list of modifiers tied to that item. So here's our base item with the base stats. And we need to link that to a generated item. So we need to generate an item first, and then that generated item gets a list of modifiers attached to it through randomization in the game when it creates these items. So I think we need an additional table for the modifiers. And then we're going to need the same idea that we had with the base item. So the base item, like I said, is a catalog of items that the game can use to randomly generate an item. But the same thing's going to go for modifiers. We're going to need a catalog of modifiers that can be used to modify a weapon. And it's also that catalog of modifiers needs to also have like a modifier level and probably a range of attributes. So if it's a low level item, the modifier should only maybe add 2 to 3 on the stat it's modifying. Whereas if it's an epic high level item, maybe it's adding 10 to 20 to that same stat or something. So that's what I mean as far as figuring out which modifiers can be used. We need a way to pull that. Otherwise, you're going to get a low level item with some crazy attribute, and it's not going to be balanced anymore. It can screw the whole game up. So all right, so our bridge table looks good here. Generated item ID, base item ID. That's really all it needs, because it's mainly just creating an entry in the database for this new generated item. And then we'll link those modifiers to it. So let's create another table. And let's call this one base modifier. And we're going to need base modifier ID. Auto incrementing is fine. And then we're going to need to attach not only the values, but I also want to attach the kind of like the UI text, so to speak. So I already closed that Diablo thing out, didn't I? Let's open that one more time. Which one was I looking at? This one? All right. So down here where it shows in the UI, we have a value. And at least in the Diablo UI, it shows you what the values could range from. And this was what was generated. So it generated 19.7. But it lets you know for your item level, this is the percentages it could have been. It could have been 12.2 on the low end, 21.5 on the high end. And then it also just lists a text element of what this is modifying. So this one says shadow resistance. So I need the like UI text value that would show here. And then I need the number that it the value that it added, that it modified. So I don't know that I need this additional metric in the UI. Maybe in the future we'll add it, but I think for now what we're going to do is just do the value, and then we want like a text of what it what it is. So it'll be very basic. It'll just be like strength, damage, armor will be our different modifiers, and that'll be what will be listed as the text. So we're gonna put modifier do I just want to call it modifier text, or is that, I don't know if that's descriptive enough. Modifier maybe just say modifier description. Let's make it slightly longer than 45 characters. Let's make it 255. And I don't think we're going to use that. But think of the situation where in the future, if we add the way to add a skill or something to a legendary item, it'll need more text to display what it is and how it works. And then we need to put here modifier value. And then we also need to say what it modifies. So the description is what shows up in the UI, but we also need to link modifier value to the actual value that it's modifying. And even though those two could be the same, probably the description and the what it's actually updating, I think depending on what my database or my attribute value names are, I think it's still better to have a description. The description might let us build that out a little bit better, where for the UI it makes more sense. So the modifier value is a number. And so we need to put modified, or maybe just say modifier type. Let's just say type. I think that makes the most sense. And then in the server, we can create an enum to cover all the different values that could be in here. I think 45 characters is plenty for that. And this is the base catalog of the table. This isn't the one that ties to the so when I say modifier value, I need to do like a low value and a high value. Modifier low value. We're going to need a high value so it can generate that. It could be a range between the low or high value. Let's move that up. And then we also need that idea of a modifier level. And that will let us track what modifiers can be used for an item. It won't necessarily match one for one on the item level of the item, but that might be a good way to do it. So if we have a level 10 item, like maybe a level 10 item is a silver longsword is the base item. If it's level 10, then that would kind of match this item, this modifier level, to give you that range of stats, maybe. Now we also need an idea of, I don't think I have that. I need to add that. We need an idea of a rarity for an item. So that'll be in the base item class, I guess. But we need to add a rarity. So if it's common, uncommon, epic, legendary, that kind of stuff. So let's go back in here and alter this. That needs to go on the base item. We'll call this just rarity. And it can be a varchar. Alright, we got rarity now. We have a base modifiers, and that has the ID for that, the description, modifier value, high value type, modifier level. So this is like the base catalog for modifiers, and we have a base catalog for the items. The generated item is used to actually generate unique values with the randomization. So we need one more table to store the generated modifiers. And since we might have modifiers for more, we will have modifiers for more than just items, we're going to name this very specifically generated item modifier. And the same thing here, we'll call this generated item modifier ID. I know it's long, but it's descriptive, and we want that to be descriptive. We don't want any confusion between the different data points and data tables and stuff. So let's see, what do we need here? So we needed the generated item modifier ID, which is just a randomly generated, but we need to link this back to the generated item. So we need a generated item ID that this matches. And then we need to know which base modifier this is coming from. So base modifier ID I need to rename that. That's not gonna work. So we're gonna call this base item modifier ID. And we need to rename that table because it's gonna overlap with some other things. We're gonna have enemy modifiers because those are gonna get generated, and there might even be other things. So alright, so base item modifier ID, we'll tie it back to that base item. Now in there we have to modify the randomness that we have to save in this new generated table is this modifier value. It's always going to have the same type. The level, the description won't change. Those are static when we pull that in. So getting this base item modifier ID is enough to get those. But we do need to store the unique randomly generated values. So that would be generated item modifier value. I know we're making these really long, but I just think that's better than making them too short and us not knowing exactly what they are. All right, so this is just a small table of values. A couple of them are linking to the different data tables or static tables, and then this last one here is the randomly generated actual value. I think that will give us what we need for those. We'll know what modifier type is through the base item, and that's what this is. So we'll know which, like if it's damage, we'll know that from this part, and then we'll know the amount that it modified it with this. And that links it back to the proper item in the database. And this is just a generic identifier that will make this unique. Okay, that looks good. So I think those are all the tables we're going to need for item generation. Let's create, while we're in here, let's create a couple test items. So let's make a wooden sword. Actually, yeah, that's fine. Item, wooden sword, item value 5. We'll say this is a level 1 item. It's pretty much the lowest rarity. We might even have a rarity under common. Could maybe be called junk or something like that. Item type is a weapon. We'll say the low damage is 1 and the high damage is 6. Attack speed 3,500, which ends up being 3.5 seconds, which is about average, I think. And damage type will be physical. For now, we're just going to have physical and magical damage types. Eventually, we might have like elemental based stuff like ice, fire, water, stuff like that. Let's make this capital since this is an enum as well. Alright, wooden sword, item level 1, worth 5 of whatever our money's called, probably gold. 1 to 6 damage, 3,500. Now let's create something similar, but better. So let's say, let's make one called Iron Sword. We'll say the item value for this is 25. It's a level 5 item, still a weapon. Let's say it does 4 to 10 damage. Let's say it's still 3,500 attack speed. Physical. We'll call this a common. And then let's make one called Silver Sword. And I'm going a little bit off of how Diablo did this now that I'm looking at this. So Diablo, I think, can have any base item possibly be a different rarity. And I guess that's just through some random roll. Like you could randomly roll a epic or rare. I think they have magic and rare as 2 of their object types. You could roll a rare wooden sword. But I don't know that I want it that way. I think I want the base items to determine their rarity. I just think that makes more sense. I mean, the stats will be random, but I don't want the rarity for an item to be random. I don't feel like there should be I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to have a legendary wooden sword, but at least right now, let's leave this like it is. So let's say the silver sword, let's say it's worth 100. Let's say it's a level 10 weapon. Say we do 8 to 16 damage, and let's say it's slightly faster as well. Physical. And we'll call this one uncommon. Junk, common, uncommon. We'll probably have a rare type. Let's just create a few more. This isn't taking too long. We'll say let's call this sword. Sort of light. Let's say the item value on this is 500. It's an item level 20 weapon. Let's say the damage is 24 to 45 at 3000 attack speed. Let's say this is magic damage. And let's call this rare. And let's create one more. Even though we'll probably have more rarity types than this, let's just create one more. Call it Flaming Sword of Power. I don't even know. I'm making up a lot of craziness here. We'll say this one's worth 2,500. Let's say it's a level 40 weapon. Say it does 50 to 100 damage. It attacks very quickly at 2.8 seconds. We'll say it's also magic damage, and we'll say it is legendary. So the rarity, I think, at least in my base logic here, will determine how many modifiers to roll. And then the item level will determine which modifiers from my modifier table it can pull from. So we'll do some kind of logic where it says the modifier level has to be between this and this. And that's what it can pick from on its random decision on what modifiers get picked. So let's say this level 10 silver sword can have modifier levels between 5 and 15 or something like that. Okay, let's create a couple of the armor types as well. Do we not have that in here? Did I forget to add the armor stuff? Because I want them both to be in the same table. Let's apply these items. And then let's alter this table because I meant to include those additional armor stats as well. So we have defense, resist, and block are the three that I want to include. Whoops. Always create that extra field when I tab. I don't want that last one. Apply. So now we have 3 more fields in this table. But those other fields will be blank. Now, is that going to cause an issue in the system if those are null? Should we have zeros in there? Just to play it safe. Okay. We'll always make sure there's a value in these fields so it don't hit null pointers. And let's create like cloth armor. Item value 10. Item level 2. Armor. These will be zeros because they don't pertain to an armor item. What do we put as damage type? Nothing, because it's not tied to. So this is a junk item. It has 2 defense, 1 resist, and no block. Block is going to be something that's mostly for shields, I think. I don't even know if it's going to pertain to these base armor items that I'm doing on this first pass. Then let's make one called leather armor. I'm realizing we need another field here. How do I want to do this though? I want to have the concept of restricted equipment, which means if you play in a mage character, you shouldn't be able to equip swords and stuff like that. Plate armor, you shouldn't be able to have plate armor if you have a wizard. So how do I include that? I need that as well. I have to create a field for that. I don't have to think through that while we're creating these test items. Let's see. So we'll say this is level 5 maybe. Armor. Common. 4 defense. 2 resist. Maybe 1 block. Let's just give it something to be able to test these values. Not necessarily saying armor will have block, but I want to be able to test this. Chain armor, let's say it is 100. Let's do 150. Say it's a level 10 item maybe. Armor, low damage. Oh, this is all zeros. Let's say this is uncommon, and let's say 7 and 3, 2. And let's add one called plate armor. Let's say it costs 600. It's a level 25 armor. Let's say this is rare. 12 defense, 5 resist, 4 block. And then let's make one more called dragon armor. Costs 5,000, and it's item level 50 armor. Legendary. 35, 25, 8. There we go. Really crazy item. All right, so now we have some just test data in here. But we need to figure out how to determine which classes can equip which items. And maybe we're not to that point yet. Maybe we'll, since we don't even have jobs or classes in the game yet, let's save that for a future refactoring. Right now in our test build, we don't have a concept of that. So we're going to leave this open where any hero can equip any item, with the assumption that that will change in the future when we have actual classes. So I think the way that'll work, so we have this item type of weapon or armor, but eventually we'll have another field here called like item slot, or not slot. We'll have item slot as well, but we're also going to have like the specific item type. Instead of weapon, it'll be like sword, spear, bow, and those will be based on what a class can use. So a wizard will not be able to use a spear, and so that won't be on their list of usable items. So if it's a spear subtype of weapon, then that will be blocked from being equipped on that wizard. So I think that's how we'll do it. We're going to have a couple extra fields added to this eventually. One for the slot that it's in, since we're going to add more than just 2 slots. There's not going to be one for weapon and one for armor. There's going to be you can have 2 different weapons, one for each hand. And then for armor, there'll probably be 5 or 6 different slots that we'll have. We'll probably have a ring, we'll have chest armor, we'll have leg armor, boots, arms, not arms, probably gloves, but you get the idea. We're going to have several different slots, and then each one of those slots will have different types that can be put in them. And if those types don't match the class, then they won't be able to be equipped. I mean, we could add that now to this table. We could add the idea of a slot. Instead of using item type, is this more of the slot type or the item slot? An item type might end up being the more descriptive type for that slot. Let me see. Let's do that now. Well, even if we don't use these fields yet, if we put them in here, maybe that'll help us remember what we were trying to do in the future when we come back to this. So let's put item type. We're going to change that to item slot. Okay. And then we'll put item type will be what it actually is. Like a more specific version of that. So it's a weapon, but what kind of weapon? It's going to be a sword. And let's even update our base data that we created here. Can I pull that new field over? Where is it? Item slot. I didn't create the new field yet. I'm looking, I'm like, where's it at? Item type. I thought I did. Maybe I didn't apply this. Item type isn't already there, right? No. Okay, let's push apply. I don't think I pushed apply. All right, let's go back into base item. Can I pull this? I don't know if I can in here. I just like it to be over here by item slot. It probably won't stay there. But let's just say this is a sword. And actually I did all of these very similar for the weapons. So that wasn't very useful. We don't have any different weapon types, but this at least gives you an idea of what's going to be in this. And this will be like cloth. Or do I call this like light, medium, heavy for the armors? Let's do that. Let's say light armor, medium armor. Let's say this one's also medium armor. Let's make these last 2 heavy armor. It's not to say there won't be high level of these other objects. That's just how I'm setting up this test data. There will be high level robes and stuff that'll be light armor. Okay. That at least gives me a better idea of how this could work eventually in the equipment system. All right. So now that we've changed this stuff up a little bit, we'll have to make sure we add these values in the proper objects. We've kind of fleshed out the database tables we need, and I think these look good as a starting point. But let's make sure I'm going to move this to the other screen, even though you won't be able to see it. I'm going to build out the proto objects now to make sure they match to what we just did. So let's start with item here. We have a name, a value, a level. And I called this one of item type, which is weapon or armor. But we rename this to item slot. Okay. And then weapon or armor is fine for now because that's what I have in the data. Now, eventually this will change to something else. It could be one-handed weapon. It could be a chest armor. We'll have different slots available. And it might still have these same object types of weapon stats or armor stats, but there'll be additional slots. And then we have so this is tied to the other table. We do need this here. So that's the item modifier. We're going to need so let's name this better. Let's say base item ID. Or these different, I got to think about this now. Do we have a base item in the proto and then also a generated item in the proto? I guess we do, don't we? Generate item request. Item modifier. Okay, so if we're going to do that, which I think we probably should. So this will be base item. So we're going to have the base item ID, name, value, level, item slot. We're going to have item type, which is just a string in this table. This is where the stats get stored. So the low damage, high damage, attack speed, damage type, defense, resist, and block are all in these values. But then we also have rarity. And then for this base item, we don't have a list of modifiers. So this will be on the other. So for the base items and for the base item table, this should capture everything that we're currently using. Okay, now we're going to need a concept of a generated item. So we need generated item ID. Then we need a reference back to the base item ID. We're not going to store all of that in this data object because we have a way to grab it this way. Or actually in the object level though, this is the, we need the base item. That's what I meant to do here. So this needs to be a base item. Base item. My bad. Why is it getting mad at me? Oh. Duh. Sometimes my brain shuts off. All right. So we have the base item. Then we're going to need for the generated item, we just need the list of modifiers. Item modifier. Modifiers. Right? Is that not everything? Now we also need so this is like the generated, let's rename this to, this is generated item modifier. So it's the value, the type. Let me look at that table. I can't remember what we used there. Let's create the base. So what we're going to have here is a base item modifier. Have a base item modifier ID. Pulling this back up over here. And then we're going to have the description. I have that one named wrong still. So we're going to update that real quick. I'm looking at the database table, and remember how I said I want this to be very specific because there's different types of modifiers. There's some for enemies, there's some for items. So we need to alter this table. And this needs to be named base item modifier. And then the same thing with all of these fields. Base item modifier. And then this needs to be the item modifier description. Item modifier low value, item modifier high value. Item modifier type. I'm going to rename that too. I'm going to say item modifier attribute. I think that sounds a little better anyways. Item modifier level. So the attribute would be like their strength, their damage, their armor, stuff like that. Base item modifier ID. All right. I think that looks better. So in the base item modifier, move that back off now. We have the description. Then we have the value. So we have and then this will be a string for the item modifier attribute. Eventually, I think it'll be an enums. We just need to set that up correctly. And the item modifier level. So that's our base item modifiers. This will end up being generated item modifiers, which we're working on next. So we said it's going to be, what should this track? Let's double check that table. So we'll have a link to the modified item. Let's get rid of all this because I don't think that's accurate anymore. So we'll have the generated item ID. We'll have a unique identifier itself for this, so it'll be generated item, generated item modifier ID. Then we need to know the base item modifier that we pulled from. And then we just need to know the value. So generated item modifier value. That work? Or do we need to pull, instead of pulling in the ID, I need to pull in the actual object. I keep doing that on these, but for these, I should be pulling in the object. So it should say, right? Excuse me. If I pull back, maybe not for that part, but for this one I will. So this will be the base item modifier. Base item modifier. All right. Item ID to link it. This is just a unique identifier. So for the generated item, we have the base item, and then we have a repeated list of these generated item modifiers. And then from in there, we can get a link to the base item modifier if we need it, which we will, to know the base attributes and stuff that we're getting affected. So we have that. And the base item links back to this, so we have all of this data in the generated item. I think that gives us what we need. We'll have to calculate the modified values. Like for combat and stuff, we'll calculate that and probably store, probably do that calculation at the beginning of combat or something. Although it won't take that much time if we have to generate it on the fly either. Or resources, it shouldn't take that much to do a few calculations. But then we'll have those adjusted values that we can use in the combat logic. I think this looks good. And see, we're storing all these sub item related stuff in this single proto file, which is cleaner, I think, than separating these out. If we had all of these in their own proto files, it gets messy. So I've started doing things this way. All right, now so for the item requests, we're sending back generated items, right? Let's see how we were setting these up. So get item info. As far as what the UI is going to ask for, because that's what these RPC calls are for, is what data do we need to return to the front end. We don't need to return the generation logic. We just need to return the finished generated item. So these responses should always return generated item objects. Update item and delete item, because I think eventually we'll have ways to update items either through like blacksmithing or something like that to upgrade items. We'll probably have that. So that's why I have this update item call. And see, this will all, a lot of this will be on the back end as well. So I don't even know if we'll need the calls set up this way. We have a generate item call that returns, or we can pull a single item. But even this isn't an RPC call. Really all we need for the UI side is get item info. Anything that's getting generated should happen on the back end. So I think for now, we are going to do this. We literally only need to be able to pull the item info that's stored. Anything else as far as generating items will happen on the server. And we're even going to go a step further here, and instead of doing an item response, we're just going to return a generated item. Okay, that looks good. Let's see, can we get rid of the ones that we don't use? For now, we can always add them back later. All we have is get item info, get item request. That's the only one down there in the request and response section that I need. So we're going to get rid of all this other stuff for now. Okay, get item request, item ID. Let's call this generated item ID, so we're very specific to what kind of item we're getting back. We can even do that here as well. Get generated item request. Okay. Yeah. Enum.proto. Oh, that was for the damage type, and that's it. I guess that's it right now, but I mean, some of these other ones will end up being enums as well. I think that looks good. I think that looks real good to get started with items. I'm going to take a quick 10 to 15 minute break, go to the bathroom and get a drink real quick, and I will be back. Let's see, I'm going to say that I will be back around, say 11:25. It's 11:13 right now. So we have the base item stuff set up in the proto file. Let's go ahead and create the database entities. And we're going to need, I think we're going to need all 4 that we just generated. We created 4 tables. We're going to need entities to tie each one of those to the server. So the first one will be called base item. This one's called base item. That class. Just double checking. I'm going to adjust this one in the table because I didn't name it right. I just named it ID. I'd rather it be the specific ID. I'm going to call it base item ID. Okay. So same thing here. This will read base item ID. And then we have item name. And we have, you know what? We can, I think we can have this generated. I'm kind of overdoing this, but for all 4 of these tables, I should just be able to generate these. So let's do a refresh. We should be able to see the new tables over here. And then for base item, create JP entity from the database. We want all the fields, which I don't know why I don't see base ID. Why isn't base item ID there? What's going on there? Maybe it was just adding the ones that I, excuse me, just adding the ones I hadn't already entered, maybe. All right. There's that one. Then we need this item modifier one. Modifier. The entity folder. Naming is good. Let's click OK there. Let's double check it. That looks good. Now we need the generated item table, which is really just that bridge table. So this should be short. Generated item. Okay. And the generated item modifier. Okay, there we go. That saved us a little bit of time. So now we have all the database entities created. Will it create the repositories? Probably not. Nope, I thought I'd just double check and see what it would do here. The repositories are pretty quick and easy anyways, at least the base repositories, so let's go and create those. So the first one is the base item repository. That will allow us to access that table. And this needs to extend a JPA repository. We're going to have to rename these just like we did before. Otherwise, we're going to overlap with the gRPC objects. So this will be base item DB. Let's see how easy it is to refactor this. This is actually a long as well, isn't it? Didn't I say long? All right, let's import that. And then let's try to refactor that and see if it updates all my code correctly. We want this to be called base item DB. All right, looks like that worked. We're going to have to do the same thing on these other classes, so let's just rename them real quick. Base item modifier DB. All my database classes, I'm putting DB on the end. That way they do not conflict with the gRPC generated classes, because they're going to have the same names. And generated item DB. And generated item modifier DB. Okay. Those are all changed. Now we can create the other repositories. So the next one will be base item modifier repository. Okay, repository needs to extend JPA repository and import that class. And then another one for the generated item repository. Oops, that wasn't right. JPA repository. There we go. That's what I wanted. And one more. What am I missing? I am missing the generated item modifier. Repository. Okay, looks good. Generated item modifier, generated item, base item. Oh, that's not right. Base item modifier. Okay, there's the repositories. Now we need to create our new service that will tie all these together. This will be, it'll be this service, but let's regenerate the proto files because we made a lot of updates to that. And this isn't going to match anymore. Let's stop the server. And when we run our Maven clean install, it will generate the files, the new files for this. Install. Okay. All right, let's see. What did I do wrong? Check the build logs above. Unit is not defined in combat. I didn't even mess with combat or encounter or party or unit. Okay, that's weird. Hmm. Did it generate anything? No, it didn't generate anything yet. Hmm. I was getting mad about unit. Let's double check unit. Oh, okay. Anywhere that I was using item, I broke because I renamed it to generated item, I guess is what all of these should be. All right, so this should read generated item. And then what was another one? Combat? Or did just fixing unit itself fix the other ones? It might have. I don't think that I use item specifically anywhere else. Maybe player? No, not in player either. I think unit is the only place that an item shows up. So let's try to do that again. Let's try to rebuild that one error where we're referencing an object that was no longer there. Nope, still got an error. Let's see. Item response is not defined. Okay, where's that at? That's in the storage. Okay. Even though I haven't messed with this one, this needs to be generated item. And then get storage item by player and by location. I guess right now that's just returning an item. So let's just do that. Even though we haven't got this far yet, I guess I built out these base items and I got to make sure this all still compiles. All right, try again. See if we fixed all the errors yet. Looks like it's getting farther this time. Okay, good. Got our new files generated. Let's close all these tabs now that I got that figured out. And we're going to go into that item service and start building this out. So we already have it implementing the service, the gRPC generated service. And we need to override the RPC calls. So let's double check what we called that. Get item info. And it uses this generated item request. Generated item request. Let me compare this to another one that we already have working. Making sure I'm doing the right syntax here. Get generated item request. And then we need the stream observer. It's going to return a generated item. Let's import that class. And then I like to throw a log statement on here. In this area, in this spot. Let's just call this getting item info for generated item ID request.get generated item ID. All right. So then when we're reviewing the logs, we'll know when that's happening. And we'll have this on while we're testing, and then we can turn it off. So the first thing we want to do is pull this back from the database. So we'll say generated item DB. But instead of doing what it just said there, we need to import the repository. So generated item repository. And auto wire that in. This should read generated item. I was wondering why I wasn't getting a code help there. It was because I had an error. There we go. I think it probably can be final. That's probably why I got the yellow squiggly. Well, that and I'm not using it. So here we'll say generated item repository dot find by ID. And we're going to pass that in request dot get generated item ID. Okay. could be null, so we have to check for that, or else null. And I usually check right here and break out if it's null. Otherwise, we can continue on. So we'll have to create our conversion methods. So we're going to need 2 conversion methods. I have those as public. I don't think that needs to be public. I'm going to make this private. And this will be convert generated item DB to generated item. We need to pass in the generated item DB. Okay, and for these, you have to use the builders for the gRPC objects. So let's do that. Let's create a new builder. Generated item dot builder. Generated item builder equals generated item dot new builder. And do we have any embedded builders in this? We probably do. I don't know what they are yet. But we need to go through. Let's pull up. Let me see, what do I need to do here? I need to pull up the proto file probably. And look at the generated item, which is pulling in what? Well, currently the generated item is just that linking bridge table. So we have, in the database anyways, we only have 2 values. We have generated item ID and we have base item ID. But the generated item that we're returning is the full base item. So we're going to need to pass that in. And then we're going to have to pull in those generated item modifiers. So we're going to have 2 more, at least 2 more what am I trying to say? Builders. We're going to have more builders. So we can get the generated item ID this way. So I can say generated item builder dot set generated item ID. Get that. But then this other value where I say generated item builder dot set the item itself, we're going to have to build that. And the same with the modifiers. Okay. So let's do that. Let's add the next builder we need. So we need the base item dot builder. And get that one. And let's build that part out. Base item stats. So base item builder dot set base item ID. We might have to pull in more than one database entry here. We're gonna have to pull in multiple queries or create like a view or a query that pulls all the data we need in one query pull. That might be a cleaner way to do this. Because we're not going to have this in that data. If I go to the generated item DB, I mean, I guess I do have that item. But I'm not going to have anything else here. Generated item. We need the generated item record. We need the base item record. And we're going to need the same thing with the modifiers. We're going to need the base item modifier DB. And we're going to need the generated. I think we need all four. Cannot resolve symbol. What was that called? Base item modifier DB. Base item modifier DB. Now it should work. And the generated item modifier DB. I think we're going to need all four of those, which means we're going to have to do some additional data pulls. This is probably going to be a good candidate for a refactor, but let's get this working, and then I'll do a little more research into a good way to refactor this, because we're pulling in 4 different queries. If we do this for every item and we're looping through an inventory, this is going to cause some performance concerns. So I'll have to look into this a little bit deeper, and we might have to create a table view or something that's already combining all this data in the database. Is probably a better bet, and that way we're just doing one database query to pull all the data back. But I'm not going to do that right now. I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and create these additional calls we need. So we need the generated item, and we're getting that by that. And then I should be able to get the base item DB entry, which we're going to have to include all these repositories as well. Let's see, we need private final base item repository, private final generated item modifier repository, base item modifier repository, not database, repository. And then let's see how smart this is, if it'll add them all for me. Okay, and then down here, same thing. Base item, generated item. Hello. Probably did something wrong up there because it's not finding the item modifier. Yeah, I did something wrong up there. Base item modifier repository. Base item modifier. One, two, three. It's missing it up here. Okay. Base item modifier repository. Okay. Have all of those included now. And we're just making these calls. So we're going to say base item repository dot find by ID. And this will be on the request. Get base, or no, it'll be on this new call. Generated item db dot get base item ID. Right? It doesn't like that call. Let's see. Required type long provided integer. Let's jump into that table. We probably just have that in the entity wrong. Which one was it? The generated item. Long. I want this to read the full name. I don't know why it set it up that way. Search for accessors. Sure. Generated item ID. Okay. Okay. We got that one. So we have the generated item, the base item. Now we need the modifiers, so we're probably going to have to create a query for this one. So generated item modifier db. This should read find all by ID. It's going to be a list. Whoops. All right. Find generated item modifier. Find all by ID. Required type iterable long. Oh, yeah, I don't want find all by ID. I want find all by generated item ID. Okay, and we're just going to tell it to create this method. All right, and I think that will work out of the box with the JPA stuff. Required type list provided object. So what else do I do here? What? What did I do here? It's not an object. I have a specific type that this should be. Okay, come on. List of generated item modifiers. DB, sorry, DB. Generated item oh my goodness, I keep missing the I in modifier. Still getting mad at me. This provides an optional object. So let's look at what it generated. I bet it generated that. That's why it's doing that. I know you can't resolve it. I want to import it. You're giving me the import options here. All right. I don't know if that's going to work out of the box or not. All right, so we have the list of modifiers. We have the base item. We have the generated item, which is really just a bridge between the base item and these generated modifier things. But for the generated item modifiers, we're also going to need the base item modifier. So how is that going to work? We almost will have won't we have a different one for each? Yeah, this is a little messy. I know I can clean this up. I'm just trying to think through it right now and get it working. But so right now we have the generated item modifiers, which will link to the generated item ID is the ones that I should pull in for that, which is what I did. Let's double check that code. Yeah, so right here for the generated item modifiers, I'm looking for them. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong spot here. Down here. I'm getting a list of all of those based on the generated item ID. Okay. But then I need to take that list, which has a base item modifier ID on each line item, and pull back the base item modifiers from that list. And that way I'll know the description and the attribute that it's modifying and the item modifier level. So to do that, I'm going to have a list. All of those are going to be different values, but I want to pull those in based on those values. So it's still going to be a list. We know that. It'll be a list of base item modifiers is what I'm going to be pulling back in. Say base item modifiers db equals And we'll have a base item modifier repository dot find all by, but we're not just passing in one value, we're passing in we're going to have this value. We're going to have the main ID field for this. So find all by base item modifier. Find all by, I mean, it's saying ID. An iterable of long IDs I could pass in to get these. Is there an easy way to get that out of this? Or do I just need to iterate over it and create a list? Because it's not, I think I'm gonna have to iterate over this. So I need to say for generated item modifier DB. And then this is messy. This is very messy. A list of longs is what I need to make. And this will be called base item modifier IDs. This is gonna work, but it's just messy. I mean, I think it's gonna work anyways. Okay, so we have the list. When we iterate through this, we just need to add the values. So we'll say base item modifiers dot or IDs dot add base item modifier IDs dot add generated item modifier db dot get base item modifier ID. And it doesn't like that. Of course it doesn't like that. Let's double check the entity table. This needs to be a long, which might also break the repository. Oh, that one already says long. Okay. Messy, messy, messy. That did not fix it yet. What they're getting mad about. Provided an integer. Generated item modifier DB. Generated item. I only looked at the base item. See, just going through these steps is gonna clean up these files for me because I'm going to see all these errors. It's just generating these all as integers. The value itself is an integer. The rest are all longs. So that's better. And then over here, we need to pass this in to get this last query back. So base item modifiers ID. And then it's going to get mad because I have to do an optional or something. We provided a list. We need to provide a optional list. All right. Base item modifier DB. Find all by ID base item modifier IDs. Okay. That looks like I have all the data I finally need to create a generated item. That's all we're trying to do here is send the full data object back to from the server to the Unity client. So we have to get all of this data pulled from the database. Now, right now, this is messy because there's 4 tables, and trying to pull all this data required 4 different database queries right now, which is probably not the most efficient way. But I think this will work. It's just messy. So we're passing in 1, 2, 3, 4 objects for this call. So we're going to create, this will read generated item equals convert generated item DB to generated item. And then we just need it to pull all of these different calls back in. So the first one is the generated item DB. Second one is the base item DB. Third one is the base item modifier. And the fourth one is the generated item modifiers. And we still have an error. Let's see what I did wrong. Generated item DB, base item DB, base item modifier DB. Oh, wait, that's where I messed up. In the actual call down here, those do need to be lists. We're going to have more than one of those. Oh my goodness, I'm clicking in there and it's not letting me click. There it goes. List. Base modifier DB. Let's rename that to multiples. List. Generated modifier. DBs. Okay. Now. Required list provided an optional list. Can I do that? I think I can. Get rid of that optional. Okay. I think that will make it happy. All right. So now we just need to go through all of these item types and start populating them. And inside the base item stats, base item builder dot set name, and this will be the base item db dot get item name, base item builder dot set value, base item builder dot set level, builder dot set item, still says type. I thought I changed that to what about item slot? And the rarity. All right, the only thing I'm missing there is I have to look up how to properly add that one because it's one or the other, weapon or armor. And in the base item, we also have weapon stats and armor stats separated, which means I'm gonna have to separate those out as well, right? They're gonna have their own builders since they're separate objects. So weapon stats dot builder. And the same thing with armor stats. All right. What did I do this on? I did this on units, right? So if we look at the unit service, will that help us figure out how to do this correctly? Since my mind just isn't working right now. So we're trying to convert a DB to the item type. But at that point, we already know what it is. We know this is a hero. So maybe I did it slightly different. Let me think here. We need to do base item builder dot set Yeah, see, there's a set armor and there's a set, I'm guessing there's a set weapon as well. There is. So I just need to do some logic here, I guess. We'll just say, it'll say if how do I do this? If base item db dot get item slot dot to uppercase I don't want to do that in there. Dot equals. Oh, equals ignore case. That's what I can use. Equals ignore case. And then here we will put our coded value for now, which isn't always a good thing to do. If it equals a weapon, else if, and we're going to do the same thing for armor. Yeah, this is a definite candidate for a refactor. This is going to be a little bit messy just to get this to work. We got a lot of logic going on just to get all the different values back from the database for a generated item though. There's not a much cleaner way to do that part, but we should be able to create some type of query in the, like some type of view in the database that should, I don't know. I don't know if it'll be able to pull all that data back or not. I gotta think through that one, and that's why I'm gonna go ahead and get this working through this brute force method here of just including all the different queries. I'll have to do some research and see if there's I'm sure there's a cleaner way to do this. So if it is a weapon, we need to set the weapon to what? We have to actually create that weapon thing first. So weapon stats builder dot set attack speed, and that's in the base item db dot get attack speed. Weapon stats builder dot set high damage, low damage, damage type. Why is there, what is that damage value? I don't remember that one. It said damage value. Wait, why didn't that work? Set damage type, damage type dot value. Required type damage type provided a string. We can still provide a string, it's fine. What am I missing? Weapon stats builder. Weapon stats has low, high, attack speed, and damage type. That should be it. Why did it look like there was another setter? Damage type value? Oh. I guess since that's an enum, that's what it does. It creates an additional. I don't know. I don't think I need to mess with that one. And then here we can set the weapon to the weapon stats builder. Yeah, that worked. Okay. So if that section works, then we should be able to do the same thing down here for armor. So armor stats builder dot set. We have the three values: defense, resist, and block. Okay, so we have out of the base item object, we should have all the values now for that part of the object. So all the base item builder. Oh, I forgot that one though. Base item builder dot set armor. Armor stats builder. Okay, so the base item for the generated item is ready to go. So let's add that to it. So generated item builder dot set base item builder. All right, so we have these first two. Now we need to do this last entry, which is the list of generated item modifiers. So list of modifiers. And these are lists coming in. So we're going to have to loop through and add these to this. So we need to create a list of generated item modifiers. Is that what I passed in? Is that what I called it? Oh no, I put DB on the end. Okay, so generated item modifiers. And then we need the builders for both of these. So we need the generated item modifier dot builder. And then we need the base item modifier builder. Okay. And let's see. So we want to loop through the generated item modifier query because there's more than one record. There could be more than one record. So for generated item DB, modifier DB. We want to loop through that. And for each one, so actually, since we're looping through this, we need to generate this new every time through. Probably both of these. So we have new builders to work with. Generated item modifier builder dot set generated item ID. Generated item DB dot get item ID. Generated item modifier builder dot set set generated item modifier ID, and that should come from this object. And then we need to set the generated item modifier value, and that's also from this DB object. Okay. This one here is the same way, right? Generated modifier DB get generated item ID. Now the last object is the base item modifier. So for this one, what the heck do we do here? This is where my updates to my database are going to help. Because we can create a view attaching the base item modifier stats to the generated item modifier table. So right now, though, what I'm going to have to do is create an additional function here and just call it, it's going to return base item modifier DB. And just say find base item modifier DB by ID. Really is what we're doing. And we're going to pass in the list base item modifier DB. Base item modifier. I don't know why, but I'm not typing that I. So we just want to loop through this list. Let me say if the base item, oh, and I need to tell it which one I'm looking for. So there needs to be a long base item modifier ID .db .get base item modifier ID get ID equals base item modifier ID. Return that object. If for some reason we don't find one, we'll just return no. That shouldn't happen, but all right. So now that I have that helper method up here, we need to do generated. No, I just need to say base item modifier. So the base item builder, not item builder, item modifier builder. What did I call that? Base item modifier. There it is. Set base item modifier ID. And up here we need to do a base item modifier DB equals whatever I just called this. Find. And this is the generated item modifier DB dot get base. Yeah, that. Get the base item modifier ID and then just pass in the full list base item modifier DBs. All right. So that'll get the base item that we need to set. So the modifier, set the base item modifier builder to base item modifier get ID. Base item modifier builder dot set the description. Okay, there's the description. And then we need to set the low value. Low value. High value. Attribute. And level. All right, we have the ID, we have the description, we have the low value, the high value, the attribute, and the level. That looks like all of them. So right here, now we can go back to the generated item modifier builder and set the base item modifier to what we just created. And then the generated item modifiers dot add okay. So that will create the list of the modifiers. And then we just have to, after we're done with creating that list, we need to assign that to the item itself. So generated item builder dot add all modifiers generated item modifiers. I know this is messy, but there's a lot of pieces to an item when you start thinking about it. And they're in several different database locations. And then we just go ahead and build this, right? Dot build. So by the time we're done with this long function, we have our generated item. Awesome. And then here, once we generate it, just need to do the general stream observer dot on next and complete it. Close out the stream call. All right, we have our RPC function built out now. Now we haven't actually defined the logic to generate actual items yet, but I think this is a good stopping point for me today since I have some other work, unfortunately, I need to be working on. So, but we did get a lot done today, considering I've only been on for about 3 hours. We now have the item tables fleshed out, and we have the service and the RPC call created. Now we still need to create the alternate call here where we're converting it from the item generated item to the database items. So we'll have to do that next time. And then once we get it where we can get the info and then save it back with that new conversion, then we'll create the logic to generate an item. So we'll create it won't be an override, but we're gonna, because it's not an RPC call, but we're gonna create a method to actually generate an item. So it's gonna start from scratch based on probably the item level. So we're gonna give it an item level, and then it's gonna randomly choose a base item in that item level range. So it'll probably have to be a range, I guess, of item levels, maybe low item level, high item level. Based on that range, it will pick a base item and then randomly generate stats for that base item. So that will be in our next session. I think we should be able to probably get that much done. But yeah, the next 2 to 3 days, I'm gonna be pretty busy at my work, at my day job. So the next time I'm probably gonna be able to do this is Thursday, is my guess. But I'll update my channel one way or the other there. And we'll just keep working on this. Once we get these items built in and actually set up in a way that we can use them, that's really going to help define some additional stuff to the game as far as building it out and making it a little more fun. So I have an error right here. Let's see if I can get rid of that before I This isn't a list, is it? Item modifiers DB. It is a list. Why am I saying .get? I don't think I need .get, do I? No, I don't. I think that's what I had wrong. All right. Anyways, I'm going to call it for today, and I will see you guys in probably 3 days. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time, hopefully.